Jamal Carter walked down the quiet suburban street, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his headphones in, nodding slightly to the beat of his favorite song. It was just another day. School, basketball practice, and now the short walk home. But today, something felt different. Across the street, Karen Thompson sat on her porch, sipping iced tea, her eyes narrowing as she spotted Jamal. She didn't recognize him, and in her mind that was enough to raise suspicion. He looked out of place in this upscale neighborhood. Her fingers tightened around her phone as her thoughts raced. Why is he here? Who is he? Her assumptions quickly spiraled into fear. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911, her voice urgent. "Yes, I'd like to report a suspicious person. There's a black teenager walking through my neighborhood. He looks like he doesn't belong." Jamal, oblivious to the call being placed against him, kept walking, nodding politely to a passing jogger. He had no idea that, within minutes, a police car would be speeding toward him, sirens blaring. What will happen when the police arrive? Let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? Jamal was just a few blocks from home when the sound of screeching tires made him turn his head. A police cruiser pulled up beside him, red and blue lights flashing aggressively. His stomach dropped as two officers stepped out, hands hovering near their holsters. "Hands where we can see them!" One officer barked. Jamal froze. His heart pounded as he slowly raised his hands, his mind racing. What's happening? What did I do wrong? From her porch, Karen crossed her arms, a smug expression on her face. "I saw him sneaking around," she announced loudly. "He doesn't live here." The officers exchanged glances, their suspicion immediately shifting toward Jamal. "Where are you coming from?" the second officer demanded. Jamal swallowed hard. "From school. I live right down the street." The first officer stepped closer. "Really? Because we got a call about a suspicious person in the area." Jamal felt his pulse quicken. He could see the way they were looking at him, not as a kid walking home, but as a suspect. "You got any ID on you?" Jamal shook his head. "No, sir. I was just walking home." Karen scoffed, folding her arms tighter. "Likely story. I've never seen him here before." The officers continued questioning Jamal, their voices sharp, their stance rigid. It didn't matter what he said. He could feel it. They had already decided he was guilty of something. Will Jamal be able to prove his innocence? Jamal's heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. He knew that any sudden movement, any wrong word could make things worse. Taking a deep breath, he spoke carefully. "I live just 2 blocks away," he said, keeping his voice steady. "I walk this way every day after school." The officers didn't look convinced. One of them, Officer Stevens, crossed his arms and tilted his head. "Yeah?" he said, voice laced with doubt. "Then why did we get a call about you sneaking around?" Jamal frowned. "I wasn't sneaking around. I was just walking home." Before he could say another word, the other officer, a stocky man with graying hair, suddenly grabbed his backpack. "Hey, what are you doing?" Jamal protested, stepping back in shock. The officer didn't answer. Instead, he yanked the zipper open and turned the bag upside down. Books, notebooks, and his lunch spilled onto the pavement. His homework fluttered across the sidewalk. Jamal's stomach twisted in anger and embarrassment as he watched his things scatter at his feet. Karen folded her arms, watching with satisfaction. "I knew it. Kids like him don't just walk through here for no reason." Jamal clenched his fists, fighting the frustration building inside him. The officer nudged the items with his boot. "Where's the stolen property?" he demanded. Jamal's eyes widened. "Stolen? I don't have anything stolen. Check my ID, my address is right there." Stevens shook his head and smirked. "That's what they all say." Jamal's chest tightened. They. He glanced around, hoping someone, anyone, would help. but all he saw were closed doors and distant stares. Cars slowed down but didn't stop. A woman across the street peeked through her curtain, then quickly disappeared. Nobody was going to step in. The stocky officer pulled out his radio. "Dispatch. We need a unit for possible trespassing and theft suspect." Jamal felt panic creeping in. This was getting out of hand. He had done nothing wrong, yet they were treating him like a criminal. Then something changed. A woman stepped out of a parked black SUV down the street. She moved fast, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. Her presence was commanding, her expression unreadable. Jamal didn't see her face yet, but Karen's smirk faded as she caught sight of the woman approaching. Who is this woman, and will she stop the officers before it's too late? Jamal's mind raced as he tried to think of a way out of this nightmare. The officers clearly weren't listening to him, and Karen's smug expression only made things worse. He needed help, fast. Then, a voice cut through the tension. "Hey, what's going on here?" Jamal turned his head and saw Mr. Harris, an elderly man who lived a few houses down. He was standing on his porch, squinting at the scene unfolding before him. Before the officers could respond, Mr. Harris's eyes landed on Jamal, and his expression changed to one of recognition. "Wait a minute," he said, stepping forward. "That's Mrs. Carter's boy, Jamal." Jamal felt a surge of hope. Officer Stevens hesitated, glancing between Jamal and Mr. Harris. "And?" Mr. Harris scoffed. "And he's a good kid. I see him walk home every day. He doesn't cause trouble. What's this about?" Jamal seized the moment. "Please, Mr. Harris, call my mom." The officers exchanged a glance. Karen groaned loudly. "Oh, come on. What's she gonna do? Yell at us?" Mr. Harris ignored her and pulled out his phone. His hands were steady as he dialed, and within seconds, the call connected. "Mrs. Carter," he said, his voice serious. "It's about Jamal. You need to get here now." A pause. Then Mr. Harris nodded. "She's on her way." Jamal exhaled in relief, but Karen just rolled her eyes. "Like that's going to change anything," she muttered under her breath. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Jamal's mother was the last person they wanted to mess with. Who is Jamal's mom, and why will her arrival change everything? The air on the street turned tense as the distant sound of an approaching vehicle echoed between the quiet houses. A sleek black SUV sped onto the block, its tires screeching slightly as it came to an abrupt stop just feet away from where Jamal stood. The doors flung open, and out stepped a tall, commanding black woman in a tailored navy blue suit. Her sharp eyes immediately locked onto the officers, and in one swift motion, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a badge. Special Agent Olivia Carter, FBI Chief. The entire scene shifted. Officer Stevens took a small step back, suddenly looking unsure. His partner, Officer Daniels, blinked rapidly, his posture stiffening. Even Karen, who had been standing with her arms crossed, suddenly seemed a little less sure of herself. Jamal breathed out in relief. "Mom." Olivia's expression softened for only a second as she looked at her son, checking him over with her eyes. But when she turned back to the officers, her face hardened. "What's going on with my son?" she demanded, her voice crisp and firm. Neither officer answered right away. Stevens opened his mouth as if to speak, then shut it again, glancing at Daniels for help. The weight of their mistake was settling in. Karen, oblivious to the shift in power, scoffed. "Oh, please, you're his mom? That explains a lot." Wrong move. Olivia turned her head slowly, fixing Karen with a stare so sharp it could cut glass. "Excuse me?" Karen hesitated, but pride got the better of her. "Your son was acting suspiciously. I was just being a responsible citizen." "Suspiciously," Olivia repeated, her tone dangerously low. Daniels coughed nervously. "Ma'am, we were just responding to a call." Olivia held up a hand, silencing him. She turned to Jamal. "Did you do anything wrong?" Jamal shook his head. "No, Mom, I was just walking home." Olivia inhaled sharply, clenching her jaw before turning her attention back to the officers. "So let me get this straight," she said, her voice slow and deliberate. "You stopped my son, dumped out his belongings, and harassed him in front of an entire neighborhood because some woman thought he looked suspicious." Neither officer spoke. Karen, still clueless, laughed dryly. "Oh, so you're one of those people, always pulling the race card." Jamal winced. He had seen his mother angry before, but never like this. Olivia stepped forward, towering over Karen. "And what, exactly, makes my son suspicious?" she asked. Her voice calm but filled with dangerous authority. Karen swallowed but lifted her chin defiantly. "He was just lurking, walking slow, and this is a nice neighborhood. You don't see kids like him around here." The words lingered in the air like poison. Officer Stevens, now realizing just how badly this was going for them, finally cleared his throat. "Ma'am, if there's been a misunderstanding, A misunderstanding," Olivia repeated, her voice rising slightly. "No, officer. This is a violation of my son's rights, and now we have a very serious problem." The two officers exchanged panicked glances, while Karen's confidence wavered. How will Olivia handle this situation? Officer Stevens shifted uncomfortably, his hand twitching at his side as if searching for the right words to say. His partner, Officer Daniels, swallowed hard before attempting to salvage the situation. "Ma'am, we were just investigating a call," he stammered, his voice noticeably weaker than before. Olivia's eyes burned with fury. "Investigating," she repeated, stepping closer. "By harassing my son? By dumping his belongings on the street like he's some kind of criminal?" Jamal stood still, watching the officer squirm under his mother's sharp glare. For the first time since the nightmare started, the power dynamic had shifted. Karen, still clueless to the weight of the situation, crossed her arms and rolled her eyes. "Oh, please. You expect us to believe your FBI?" A dangerous silence fell over the street. Without breaking eye contact, Olivia pulled out her phone, tapped the screen, and held it up to her ear. "This is Special Agent Olivia Carter. I need to speak to Chief Reynolds immediately." The color drained from both officers' faces. "Wait," Stevens blurted out, raising a hand as if to stop her. Daniels turned pale. Ma'am, that won't be necessary," he said quickly, panic creeping into his tone. Karen scoffed, still trying to save face. "I'm sure the chief has better things to do than entertain this nonsense." Olivia's expression didn't waver. "Oh, I'm sure he does, but I also know he's not going to be happy when he sees how two of his officers handled this situation." The tension was suffocating. Jamal looked around. Other neighbors were now outside, watching closely. The young woman who had called Olivia in the first place had her phone raised, still recording. This moment wasn't just between them anymore. It was about to go viral. Officer Stevens forced a nervous smile. "Look, let's not escalate this. No harm was done." "No harm?" Olivia's voice was ice. She turned to her son. "Jamal, was there harm done?" Jamal hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I was humiliated. I was scared." Karen threw up her hands. "Oh, come on. This is ridiculous." Olivia snapped her gaze back to her. "No. What's ridiculous is you thinking you have the right to determine who belongs here and who doesn't." Karen shrank slightly under Olivia's intensity, but refused to back down. Meanwhile, the officers exchanged nervous glances, fully aware they had crossed a line they couldn't erase. Will Olivia push for serious consequences, or will the officers walk away unscathed? Olivia turned her sharp gaze toward Karen, crossing her arms with a controlled intensity. "You called this in?" she asked. her voice calm but laced with authority. Karen, still unwilling to back down, lifted her chin defiantly. "Yes, I did. He looked suspicious walking around here like he didn't belong." The murmurs among the onlookers grew louder. More people had their phones out now, capturing every second. A man in a blue polo shook his head. "I see kids walking home from school every day. What exactly looks suspicious about this one?" Olivia let the silence stretch before she smirked slightly. "Oh, I see. You mean he looked black?" Gasps rippled through the small crowd. Karen's face turned red. I never said that," she stammered. "But that's what you meant," Olivia pressed, stepping forward. "And instead of minding your business, you put my son's life in danger because of your prejudice." Officer Daniels cleared his throat uncomfortably, shifting on his feet. "Ma'am, we were just responding to a call." Olivia whipped her gaze toward him. "A false call. You detained my son with no evidence, no probable cause, and no reason other than the word of a woman who assumed he was a criminal." Stevens rubbed a hand down his face, realizing how badly they had messed up. "Look, we can all agree that mistakes were made, right?" "Not mistakes," Olivia corrected. "Discrimination, racism, abuse of power." The young woman recording stepped forward, shaking her head. "And let's not forget excessive force. You dumped a kid's backpack out on the street like he was some thug." Karen scoffed. "Oh, come on. It was a misunderstanding." Olivia folded her arms. "You falsely reported a crime. Do you know what that's called, Karen?" Karen's mouth opened, but Olivia answered for her. "It's filing a false police report, which, in case you didn't know, is illegal." The murmur among the crowd turned into full-blown chatter. Officer Daniels turned to Karen, his expression darkening. "Wait, did you actually see him commit a crime? Or did you just assume he was up to something?" Karen's mouth opened and closed. I just thought—" "You thought wrong," Olivia snapped. "And now we're going to see what happens when your actions have consequences." Karen's expression twisted into panic as Olivia pulled out her phone once again. Will Karen be arrested for filing a false report, or will she try to escape responsibility? Olivia stood firm, her piercing gaze locked onto the two officers. "You're going to return my son's belongings, and you're going to apologize. Now." Officer Daniels hesitated, his face flushed with embarrassment. But the weight of the crowd's stares left him no choice. He bent down, hurriedly stuffing Jamal's school books and papers back into his backpack before handing it over. Sorry about that, kid," he mumbled. Jamal took his bag, his expression unreadable. "You should be apologizing to every black kid who's been treated like this," he muttered under his breath. Before Olivia could respond, the wail of another siren cut through the air. A second police vehicle pulled up, and out stepped a tall man in a decorated uniform. Police Chief Randall Monroe. Daniels and Stevens stiffened instantly, snapping to attention. The chief's eyes scanned the scene, quickly landing on Olivia. "Agent Carter," he greeted, his voice clipped but respectful. Olivia didn't waste time. "Your officers detained my son without cause, harassed him, and emptied his belongings onto the ground, all because of her false report." She jerked her chin toward Karen. Chief Monroe's gaze flicked to Karen, then to his officers. "Is that true?" Neither Daniels nor Stevens responded. Monroe exhaled sharply, unimpressed. "Both of you, back to the station, now." Daniels' eyes widened. "Sir, I said now." Monroe's voice left no room for argument. Daniels and Stevens exchanged a nervous glance before retreating to their vehicle, peeling away without another word. Karen, who had been inching backward, took the moment to turn and walk away, but Olivia caught her wrist before she could escape. "Oh, no, Karen," she said smoothly. "You're not going anywhere." Karen's eyes darted around. I didn't mean to cause trouble. I was just trying to be safe." "Safe from what?" A black teenager walking home? Olivia's voice was dangerously calm. You called the police on an innocent boy. That's filing a false report. Karen's breath hitched. I didn't know it was illegal. Olivia let out a short, humorless laugh. Ignorance isn't an excuse. Chief Monroe pulled out his radio. I need an officer to respond for a misuse of emergency services and false reporting. Karen's face drained of color. Wait, you're really having me arrested? This is ridiculous. Olivia leaned in. So was treating my son like a criminal. Actions have consequences, Karen. The murmurs from the crowd grew louder. People cheered. Someone muttered, "About time." As Karen's protest turned into panicked pleas, the police car arrived to take her away this time. Will Karen finally learn her lesson? Or will she try to play the victim once again? Karen's face twisted in disbelief as she took a step back. It was just a misunderstanding, she protested, her voice desperate. I didn't mean anything by it. Olivia took a deep breath. Her hands clenched at her sides. She had spent years handling cases like this, cases where innocent black boys were harassed, falsely accused, and even harmed simply for existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. But this wasn't just another case. This was her son. She stepped forward, her eyes locked onto Karen's. No, Karen, Olivia said slowly, her voice unwavering. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was racial profiling. Karen shook her head wildly. No, I was just being cautious. I thought he looked like what? Olivia cut her off, her tone sharp as steel. Like a threat, like someone who didn't belong in this neighborhood. Karen's lips trembled, but she had no answer. The weight of Olivia's words settled over the crowd like an approaching storm. Murmurs rippled through the onlookers, some nodding in agreement, others whispering among themselves. An elderly black man shook his head and muttered, "Same story, different day." A mother in the crowd clutched her young son's hand a little tighter. Then, from the back, a voice called out, "She needs to be held accountable." Karen's eyes widened. Accountable? For what? She gasped. For wasting police resources, said Chief Monroe, stepping forward with a hard expression. For making a false emergency call. Karen let out a short, disbelieving laugh. You can't be serious. I thought I was helping. I didn't know who he was. Olivia's expression didn't waver. And that's exactly the problem. Karen opened her mouth to argue, but Chief Monroe was already nodding toward one of his officers. Take her in. The officer stepped forward, reaching for Karen's wrist. No, no. Karen's voice rose in panic as the officer took hold of her arm. This isn't fair. I was just trying to look out for my neighborhood. But you weren't looking out for your neighborhood. Olivia shot back. You were looking out for yourself. And in the process, you humiliated my son. You put him at risk. You made sure he would remember this moment for the rest of his life. Karen's lip quivered as the officer began leading her toward the squad car. I didn't mean to hurt anyone, she whispered. A young black woman in the crowd shook her head. And yet, you did. The officer opened the car door, guiding Karen inside as she kept mumbling about how this wasn't fair, how she didn't mean it, how she didn't deserve this. But for once, it was fair. A wave of cheers erupted from the onlookers as the door shut behind her. Justice, real justice, was finally being served. Jamal, still standing beside his mother, exhaled shakily. Is this really over? Olivia turned to him, her eyes softening. She brushed his curls back gently, the way she had when he was little. For now, she said. But this fight isn't just about today. A woman in the crowd stepped forward. Thank you, she said to Olivia, for standing up to her, for all of us. Olivia nodded, glancing at the faces around her. Some relieved, some thoughtful, some angry. She knew the truth. This wasn't just about Karen. This was about every black child who had ever been followed in a store. Every black teenager who had been stopped by police for looking suspicious. Every black man who had been assumed guilty before he even opened his mouth. This was about every conversation she had ever had with her son, telling him how to behave if he was ever confronted, how to keep his hands visible, how to stay alive. Because this moment, this fear, this humiliation had happened before. And if something didn't change, it would happen again. Jamal looked up at her, his voice quieter now. "Mom, what do we do now?" Olivia took a deep breath. "We keep speaking up," she said. "We make sure they listen." As she took her son's hand and walked toward their car, she knew one thing for sure. Today they had won, but the fight was far from over. Will this moment create real change, or is this just another story that will be forgotten? Jamal let out a long breath as he finally embraced his mother. The weight of everything, the fear, the humiliation, the anger, began to fade as he felt her steady presence. "It's over now," Olivia whispered, smoothing his hair as she held him close. He clung to her a moment longer before stepping back, looking up at her with quiet admiration. His mother had always been strong, but today she had been unstoppable. Nearby, reporters crowded forward, microphones and cameras aimed directly at Olivia. The moment had gone viral, and people across the country were watching. Olivia didn't shy away. Instead, she turned to face them, her eyes sharp and unwavering. "This isn't just about my son," she said, her voice clear and firm. "This happens every day, to kids like Jamal, to men and women who have done nothing wrong. And too often, no one listens, no one cares, until it's too late." A hush fell over the crowd as her words sank in. She continued, her tone laced with determination. "We talk about justice, about fairness, about protecting our communities. But how can we claim to protect people when we treat innocent lives like criminals based on nothing more than the color of their skin?" A young black father in the crowd nodded, holding his toddler close. An older woman wiped away a tear. Karen, now sitting in the back of the police car, was no longer sneering. Her eyes darted between the cameras and Olivia, the weight of her actions settling in. The footage of the incident was already everywhere. Social media was ablaze, news outlets were covering it non-stop, and people from all backgrounds were speaking out. This wasn't just about a single case. This was about change. Olivia looked directly into the cameras, sending a message to anyone who was watching. "If you see injustice, speak up," she said. "If you hear someone being falsely accused, stand with them. And if you're in a position of power, use it to make things better, not worse." She placed a hand on Jamal's shoulder. "Because respect should never be based on skin color. It should be a given." The crowd erupted in applause. The moment wasn't just powerful, it was historic. As Olivia and Jamal walked away together, the world watching, one thing was clear. This wasn't the end. This was the beginning of something bigger.